Okay. Thank you very, very much for that. My name is David Silverberg, as you heard the introduction, and I want to talk about here in Collier County and what's been going on. First of all, I'm going to take a little quibble. We don't have fascism as it was defined in Europe. We do not have a fascist party by that name here in Florida. We don't have a movement that's fascist with a capital F. What we have is a lot of fascistic developments, both in Florida, here in Collier County, I'm sorry to say, but I'm going to really draw that distinction. And I'm also going to use a term called fascio-Trumpism, because, you know, it's fascistic, and we know that when we're saying fascism, we mean it in a generic sense. It's authoritarian, it's dictatorial, it's oppressive, and of course we have Donald Trump, who has unleashed all this in the world. And by the way, I Googled fascio-Trumpism. It's nowhere on Google, so you are hearing it here for the first time. Here in Florida, we have Trump Light, the man where charisma goes to die, as Rick Wilson put it, Governor Ron DeSantis, who, by the way, as we all know, is a total creature of Trump. He would not exist on the political stage if Trump hadn't endorsed him in his race for governor and got him through the primary. And he is, you know, as Dale very ably showed, he is trying to coordinate across the state in its culture and its society this anti-woke, fascio-Trumpist culture. But right here in Collier County, we've had some disturbing trends, and I'm sure you've all been following them. And the chief evangelist for this is our very own Francis Alfred Oakes III, whom we all know as Alfie. And when you look at it, the similarities between Alfie and Trump are really remarkable. They're both businessmen, they're both bombastic, they're both mercurial, they're both fanatical in their ways, they're both fascio-Trumpist, MAGAs. Alfie once got a phone call from Trump and thinks he's just about God. And before I go further on Alfie, and it's not entirely focused on Alfie, but I want to make clear that I don't hate this guy. I have met him. I did an article on him for a magazine called Mother Jones. He sat down with me. We had a 2-hour interview. He was gracious. He was cordial. He was, I think, forthcoming and truthful, well, I'm sure, where it was in his interest. If the guy stuck to food and groceries, we'd all be better off, and he would be a whole lot better off. But Alfie has his opinions, and he is absolutely entitled to those opinions. He's entitled to express those opinions, and I support that. But we are entitled to respond and react to those opinions and to his actions. And it's the actions that are really count. And one other thing, just to cover my backside. He is a public figure. Alfie is politically active. He was a state committeeman in the Collier County Republican Party. So his actions are subject to scrutiny, criticism, and analysis. Having said that, he has tried to impose a fascio-Trumpist ideology on Collier County, and especially on the Republican Party in Collier County. He won as a state committeeman in 2020. He ousted a guy named Doug Rankin. He was riding on his defiance of COVID protocols, and in the midst of the passions and the pressures of the pandemic. And he pretty much took control of the Republican Executive Committee here in Collier County, the REC, or as I prefer to call it, the REC. And between the REC and his own political action committee, Citizens Awake Now, CANPAC, he succeeded in altering the political balance here in Collier County. Now, in 2022, he put up 3 candidates for the school board, and then 2 candidates for the Collier County Commission. He won all his races, which was an achievement, if you want to use that word. But as a result, we have in Collier County a very fascio-Trumpist agenda. And the commission and the school board have moved in that direction, although there are changes in the school board. When you look at what our Board of Commissioners has passed, they passed a federal nullification law, the so-called Bill of Rights Sanctuary Ordinance, which says that Collier County has the right to nullify federal law, to not obey it if it considers it unconstitutional, which is really going to come and bite this county, which I can go into detail later. They've outlawed mask and public health mandates, and they passed what was a very, very, very critical anti-public health resolution that got watered down. But that anti-vax, anti-COVID, anti-mandate, anti-public health effort was very much promoted. Fortunately, the ordinance, the law that has penalties that they passed, just duplicated state law. State law says you can't have mask mandates anymore, and it says the same thing. So it didn't really make that much of a difference. Like Sarasota County, they withdrew Collier County from the American Library Association. Then last month they passed an anti-Amendment 4 resolution. Now that doesn't have the force of law, but it was the start here in Collier County of a movement to have the counties come out against Amendment 4 and a woman's right to choose, and we saw it just passed again in Lee County. So it is moving along. I don't know how many people it's going to influence to go against Amendment 4, but they did that. And then weirdly, and I got to admit, I really did not see this coming, they voted to end fluoridation in Collier County water. And so now all the kids can get cavities, and they can make more work for local dentists, and Alfie will protect his pineal glands, which he was worried about. And by the way, everybody who buys toothpaste, you got to look for that fluoride because you're not going to get it from the water in Collier County. Let me also point out, and this came up in our interview, he says, Alfie, that he owns 3,000 guns, that he can arm every employee of Seed to Table. And in 2022, he was addressing a group and he said, I'm all in. We don't want to talk about what that is, meaning that if he didn't like the way the 22 elections had come out, he might launch an armed revolt. He said, but we have to be all in. Well, the 22 elections went very well for him, so we still live under, law and order. Now, all this is very menacing, and he was moving to further extend this in 2024. But something very, very interesting happened, and it happened this past August, on August 20th. There was a revolt. There were people who had enough of Alfie and Alfie fascio Trumpism and magism here in Collier County, and the people who revolted were all the Republicans. The Republicans in their primary repudiated the Alfie MAGA candidates for all the different offices that he was proposing. Alfie didn't care about anybody's qualifications. In fact, I heard him once say in a speech, he said, I don't care what a person's IQ is or what their education is. All they need is some back and common sense. So he was looking for fellow fanatics, and he had them up for two school board seats. He had them up for a county commission. All three were incumbents, but he really wanted to get rid of Bert Saunders in the 3rd district. And of course, he wanted to get rid of Melissa Blazier as supervisor of elections. That was a very dangerous one, and the county assessor. And at that point, he had reached a point where the Republicans said no, especially in the technical offices like supervisor of elections, where expertise is really important, where you have to know what you're doing. Even the Republicans had had enough. And by the way, Collier County, and I hope you appreciate it, is a pretty well-run county. This place functions, and it functions very well. And maybe Steve Bannon will call it the deep state, but I'll call it the deep county, and it works for us. And had he gotten these other people in, it would not have. Now, there was one position that he did win, a lawyer, and she is now a committee person on the rec. And when she was the one who drafted this federal nullification law, and when she did it in 2021, well, it might be in 1821. When she did it in 2021, our own David Milstein characterized that law as proposed by someone who doesn't know constitutional law. But she won her election as state committee person. So why is this revolt, this little revolt among the rec, so significant? Well, I think it's significant because it shows that there's a line, there is a point beyond which this kind of fascio-Trumpism becomes oppressive even to those people who adhere to these party principles. And these are the folks that Rick Wilson was talking about. These are people who still think, people who are thoughtful. I mean, they're very conservative. I mean, have no doubt about that. But they know fascism when they see it, and they didn't want any part of it. And they responded with a fundamental American patriotism and belief in freedom and liberty, and they expressed this at the voting booth, and all those MAGA candidates lost. And by the way, Alfie, of course, got disqualified because he didn't fill out his papers properly. And so he is off the rec. And Doug Rankin, who he deposed in 2020, is now going to be the head of the rec. He's a very conservative guy. He's been, I think, a conservative Republican from the womb, but he is not Alfie's Republican. So my hope is that the same kind of revulsion and the same kind of revolt and the same kind of discontent with this kind of fascio-Trumpism is abroad in the land, and that Rick will get the percentage of Republicans who have had enough. They will vote for freedom and for liberty. But, we have to remain vigilant. Now I want to talk about the what we do about it part of this presentation. Remember something, even after this election, as Rick Wilson pointed out, there are going to be attempts to negate what happens, to overturn the results. And Florida, Lord knows, has a record of passing constitutional amendments that the legislature and the governor then ignore. And we've got to hold their feet to the fire. But there are maybe three broad principles that we can follow. One is vigilance. We've got to be on top of everything these people are doing. And as Dale mentioned, one effort that is truly fascist, and fascist with a capital F, is an attempt to make this a one-party state. And there have been those attempts. And Christian Ziegler, who was chair of the Florida Republican Party before he got deposed in a sex scandal, once said that for the Republican Party of Florida, the work continues as our job is not done until there are no more Democrats in Florida. This is not competition. This is extermination. And that is a very, very bad trend. And there was one bill proposed last year that would have decertified the Democratic Party in Florida. It wasn't serious. It didn't advance. But it shows a mentality, and we have to be especially vigilant to that. We have to be a multi-party state because we're a multi-party society. Our media plays an essential role in this, and I have to say that I have been disappointed by our local media. I don't think they keep track of these people. They don't emphasize the political threats that are out there to the degree I wish they would. And this is why I started the Paradise Progressive blog, which I hope you're familiar with or will be familiar with afterwards. And it's trying to fill the gap that I see in our political reporting from our traditional media. We've got a good reporter in Dave Elias, who's very active on NBC2. But, he can't do it alone. We all have to be our own monitors, our own minute people to keep track of these kinds of loony ideas like getting rid of the fluoride and do it when it's coming up. You know, they passed an anti-immigrant law last year. That law went through subcommittee, it went through committee, it went through the legislature as an entirety, and this is a statewide law. And then Ron DeSantis signed it into law, and then suddenly the protests start. I'm sorry, that's not when you do it. You may be mad about the law, but you've got to be active when it's being formulated, when it's on the table. And that brings us to the second pillar, which is response. You've got to respond. You've got to be vigilant, and when you see something bad, you've got to respond. And you've got to, here in Collier County, that means contacting our Board of Commissioners. And even if they don't listen, even if they vote against it, they need to know that there are people who are watching what they do. There have been statements in the Collier County Commission. Well, Chris Hall once said, you know, something is out there. He couldn't understand why there was all this protest against it. It was because he put it out there. It was a loony law that he wanted to do, and everybody saw what it was, and they protested, and it does have an effect. And that also applies at the congressional level, and we can get into our congressmen some other time. But you've got to be vigilant, responsive, and the third pillar is activism. You've always got to be active. It doesn't end with the election. It doesn't start with the run-up to the election. The day after the election, we're going to have to be active. And as Michelle Obama said in her speech to the Democratic National Convention, do something, all right? So we all know, look, none of us are going to take up arms. I'm pretty sure that no matter what happens, none of us are going to go out and shoot up a firehouse or something like that. But we all know what the traditional things are. Making phone calls, canvassing, which, by the way, is a great exercise, gets you to meet all your neighbors, and you talk to people, writing postcards. All of this are democratic norms. I want to add another challenge to everybody. Since social media is now our preferred and most common use of communication, I want to challenge everybody here to reach out to 10 people they have never met, never contacted, and don't know, and try to convince them to your point of view, whatever that point of view is, if you think that's important. 10 people you don't know. You got to get outside of your bubble. You got to talk beyond your friends. Lord knows there's plenty of feeds and all sorts of things. There's all these nice Chinese ladies who want to get to know me. I could talk to them. You know, but you can reach out to people that you've never talked to, never met, and do it on social, and use social media. You can do it at home. You can do it at any hour. You can do it, you know, unprompted, or when you're relaxing or taking a bath or whatever. But try to reach out to people, and that's really important, and it's especially important for this election. Now, all my recommendations are based on the premise that we'll have a democracy, that our laws will function, that you can do these things, that it's legal, that it's protected. If we lose democracy, we lose everything, and I think everybody in this room knows it. And today, as Rick pointed out, is 30 days to the most important election of our lifetimes, our children's lifetimes, and our grandkids' lifetimes. I don't have a grandchild who's ready to vote yet, but she will be affected by what we do here next month. And it brings up to me what I consider one of the most meaningful elections that ever occurred. And that occurred on September 11th, 2001. And all of us in that room remember that day. And it was an election held in the back of an airplane, United Airlines Flight 93. And we know what had happened. Al-Qaeda hijackers had taken over that plane, killed the pilot and the co-pilot, and there was one standing outside the cockpit threatening to blow up the plane with a bomb. The passengers went into the back, and they had to decide what to do. They knew that that other planes had hit the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. They didn't know where they were headed. And so what did they do? They took a vote. They held an election. They held an election because that's what we as Americans do. When we are faced with a decision, when we are faced with a course of action, we take a vote. And there was one passenger, Todd Beamer, who said, okay, let's roll. And they voted to try to take back that airplane. Nobody said the vote was rigged. Nobody said that there had to be a hand count of ballots. No one said there was a secret landslide that nobody had seen. And nobody said they weren't going to accept the results of that vote. Because that's not what Americans do, not what real patriotic Americans do. And that's not what those passengers did on that airplane. They took a vote. They acted on their decision. Now, the plane crashed. They fought for that cockpit, and ultimately it crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But by their action, they may have saved the United States Capitol. They may have saved the White House. Who knows how many thousands of Americans' lives they saved. And let me tell you, I was on the ground in Washington, D.C. on 9/11. My wife was working at home. My son was in a high school next to the CIA. We were all saved by those people as a result of their election. Now, today, we have hijackers again. We are the passengers in the back of that plane. And these people are trying to take that aircraft into darkness and dictatorship and disaster. And we have got to get control of that aircraft. And on November 5th, we will hold that election. And I hope we will all work, and I certainly intend to make sure that we get that airplane under control and we land it safely in a free democracy. So that's 1 month from today. Each of us has something to do. So let's roll.